In a small town surrounded by dense, gloomy forests, there stood an old house that had become the subject of countless rumors and ghostly tales. Locals whispered that a vengeful spirit resided within, one that claimed the souls of anyone who dared to spend a night inside. The legends were chilling, filled with warnings about those who vanished without a trace after visiting. Yet, despite these ominous warnings, a group of brave friends decided to tempt fate and spend the night in this sinister place, eager to prove their courage. Each of them had their reasons for this risky decision. For Rob, it was a way to overcome his fears. He had always been afraid of the dark and ghosts, and now he wanted to prove to himself that he could handle them. Scarlett, on the other hand, was an avid ghost hunter looking for new stories for her blog. She dreamed of becoming famous and thought this would be great material for her next article. The other friends, like Mark and John, simply wanted to support their companions, although fears raged within them as well. Mark, always confident and cheerful, was slightly nervous but didn't want to show it to the others. John, being the youngest in the group, felt he had to prove his bravery. As they approached the house, the wind howled through the trees, creating a sinister soundtrack for their adventure. Dry twigs crunched underfoot, and the moon illuminated their path, giving everything an unreal feeling. Upon entering, the old wooden floors creaked ominously, and the air was thick with dust that danced in the beams of their flashlights. The walls were adorned with faded wallpaper, peeling at the edges, hinting at times when the house was filled with life and laughter. In the center of the main room stood an antique fireplace, its mantel cluttered with cobwebs, and around it were mismatched chairs, remnants of long-forgotten gatherings. The friends settled into the chairs, their hearts racing with excitement and fear. Each time they told scary stories, laughter mixed with anxious gasps, creating an atmosphere thick with tension. Scarlett tried to remain calm, but her voice trembled as she recounted how a group of teenagers had once disappeared in a similar house. Every creak made them jump. When the light from their flashlights flickered, shadows seemed to come alive on the walls, creating eerie images. John, who had always been the bravest of the group, suggested playing a game of truth or dare. He thought this would break the tension, and initially, everyone agreed. But with each new truth and challenge, the atmosphere grew increasingly uneasy. When it was Scarlett's turn, she laughed and said she would never believe in ghosts. If they exist, let them show themselves, she exclaimed, laughing, but there was a hint of fear in her eyes. At that moment, the room filled with silence, and the friends felt a chill creeping under their skin. As night fell, the air grew colder, and an unsettling silence enveloped the house. Suddenly, Rob noticed a strange glow emanating from the corner of the room. His curiosity piqued, he stood up to investigate, discovering an old, dusty doll sitting on a shelf. The doll had a cracked face and a twisted, sinister smile that seemed to beckon him closer. "Look what I found," Rob exclaimed, holding it up proudly. "It looks like it wants to play with us." As soon as he said those words, the atmosphere in the room changed. An unpleasant silence surrounded them, and they felt an unnatural chill filling the air. Suddenly, the windows rattled violently in the wind, and the light from their flashlights flickered. Scarlett screamed in terror when she saw the doll that Rob was holding move slightly, its head slowly turning to face them. Its eyes gleamed in the dim light, and at that moment, it seemed to them that they were not just looking at a doll, but at something much more sinister. "It's just a trick of the light," Rob tried to reassure the others, though his voice trembled with fear. Soon, they realized that the doll was not just a lifeless object. It emitted soft hissing sounds that seemed to form words, and it appeared to be trying to say something. "Get rid of it," Scarlett screamed, backing away in sheer terror. At that moment, the doll slipped from Rob's grip and fell to the floor with a loud crack. Panic erupted among the friends as they scrambled for the exit, but to their horror, the door slammed shut, trapping them inside. The room darkened, and ghostly silhouettes began to emerge from the shadows, slowly approaching them with unsettling grace. Each of them felt their hearts pounding in their chests, and fear constricted their throats. Rob, feeling overwhelmed by fear and desperation, began to look around for an escape. Each heartbeat seemed louder than the last. What do we do?" One of them shouted, their voice sounding frantic. They realized they needed to find a way to escape this malevolent house, but as they darted from room to room, every door led them back to the main hall, as if the house itself were toying with them. Meanwhile, the doll reappeared in the center of the room, almost as if it were waiting for someone to approach. Rob, frozen in fear yet determined, felt a surge of urgency. He approached the doll and, gathering all his courage, asked, "What do you want from us?" For a moment, silence enveloped the room. Then the doll spoke in a chilling, childlike voice, "I want you to play." At that moment, the ghostly figures began to laugh, their voices merging into a haunting symphony that filled the room. The friends understood that they were not merely trapped, they had become unwilling participants in a twisted game, and their laughter no longer seemed joyful. In a fit of desperation, Rob seized the doll and threw it forcefully to the floor. "I'm not playing," he shouted defiantly. As he did, the entire house trembled violently, and one by one, the ghostly figures began to fade, their laughter echoing into silence. The doors swung open, and the friends rushed outside, not daring to look back. Once outside, they collapsed onto the grass, gasping for breath, the adrenaline still coursing through their veins. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a faint glow through the trees. They vowed never to return to that house, but deep down, they knew this experience had changed them forever. The next day, as they tried to shake off the terror of the previous night, they couldn't help but feel an overwhelming urge to return to the house. They needed to confront the doll, to destroy it once and for all. But when they arrived, they found that the house had transformed. All the windows were boarded up, and the doors were locked tight. On the front door, a note hung ominously, "You cannot leave the game until you fulfill all the conditions." From that day on, the friends never returned to the house, but every year, on the anniversary of their fateful night, they heard distant laughter echoing from the woods, and the sensation of being watched would creep over them. They could almost feel the doll's gaze upon them, patiently waiting for them to once again dare to step into its sinister game. The friends began to notice that their behavior had changed. They became more nervous, and something sinister appeared in their eyes. Each of them experienced their own visions. Rob saw the doll in his dreams, Scarlett heard its whispers calling her name, and John even found strange notes in his notebook, seemingly written by someone else's hand. Each time they tried to talk about it, their voices grew quieter, as if fear filled their hearts. Scarlett, unable to cope with the rising tension, decided to consult an old book about ghosts, hoping to find answers. She read many stories about abandoned houses and spirits, but none of them could prepare her for what they had experienced. A sense of dread emerged in her heart. What if we brought something terrible upon ourselves? She discussed this with the others, and they decided they had to return to the house to try to break the connection. When they returned, the house looked different. Dark shadows seemed to glide along the walls, and every creak made them flinch. They cautiously entered, their flashlights illuminating dusty corners that once held memories of joy. Suddenly, they heard laughter echoing through the empty rooms. It was the same laughter they had heard that terrible night. Rob, gathering his courage, shouted into the darkness, "We've come to put an end to this." In response, a whisper echoed, seemingly from the depths of the earth, "You cannot escape the game." The friends felt a cold sweat break out on their brows. They were trapped, and they needed to find a way to rid themselves of the doll and its malevolent influence. They began searching for items that could help them. Scarlett recalled an ancient ritual she had read about in one of the books. "We need to find something that belongs to the doll and burn it," she said, her voice trembling with fear and determination. The friends started rummaging through the rooms, hoping to find something that could aid them. In one room, they stumbled upon an old chest covered in a layer of dust. When they opened it, they discovered numerous old toys and trinkets, but among them was a doll that resembled the one they had seen earlier. However, this was not just any doll, it was its duplicate, the one that seemed to be linked to their horrors. At that moment, the doll they found began to move, and ghostly figures reappeared, surrounding them. "You cannot leave," they whispered in unison. The friends, summoning all their courage, began to recite the words of the ritual that Scarlet had memorized. The doll started to shake, and its sinister smile faded, leaving only an empty shell. Bright flashes of light burst from the dark corners of the room, and the ghostly figures began to vanish, their cries merging with joyful laughter. "We're free!" Mark shouted, his voice sounding like a prayer. The doors opened, and the friends rushed outside into the fresh air, not looking back. When they found themselves outside, they collapsed onto the grass, gasping with a mix of joy and fear. The sun was just beginning to rise, and they realized they had changed forever. Each of them felt that the fear they had experienced had given way to newfound strength. They knew that together, they could face any challenges. From that day on, the friends never returned to that house, but every year, on the anniversary of their eerie night, they heard distant laughter echoing from the woods, and the sensation of being watched would wash over them. Yet in their hearts, there was no longer fear, only determination. They knew they had overcome something terrible and were now ready to confront any challenges life threw at them. And every year, as they remembered that night, they couldn't escape the haunting question, what happens to those who dare to reveal their secrets? But now they knew they had each other, and that was enough to face any fear.